Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 to 8. Let's come back then to our conversation concerning this so-called Harper's Law and put some of the points you've made to one of the architects of it, or the man who's certainly given his approval, is the Conservative MP for Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, who joins me now. And I appreciate, Deputy Prime Minister, you've been too busy today, but a number of people have phoned. They have concerns. I don't actually side with them, but I must put them to you, that in some instances now this has blurring the lines between murder and between manslaughter, and there could be instances where someone will be given a life term that is unjust because of what he or she has done. Is there any discretion afforded when it comes to sentencing with Harper's Law? Morning to you.
Good morning, Nick. And look, I know you've covered this extensively. I think it's the right thing to do. I don't think it's a question of blurring anything. I think we're saying that if you kill an emergency worker in the course of their duties while you're engaged in criminal activity, let's remember, and PC Andrew Harper was apprehending 3 individuals suspected of burglary, I think it should attract a mandatory life sentence. There is some discretion for a judge in truly exceptional circumstances, but of course they would have to be truly exceptional. We do not want the thing being undermined by the back door. And I think it's right. It reflects the seriousness of the offending. I think it also, let's look at the scale of this. We had 10,000 convictions last year for assault against emergency workers. This isn't just a one-off tragic case, albeit it certainly is that, and I pay tribute to Lissy Harper. It's also about making sure as we build back out this pandemic that we're on the side of the emergency workers who put themselves on the line for us every day. That's what we stand for, and that's what I'm pleased we're going to be introducing.
But just lastly on this, an example of someone driving their car at 40 miles an hour in a 30-mile zone, their tyre explodes, they are committing a criminal act, they're speeding, their tyre explodes and they career into a police officer. They go to jail, as I understand it now, for life. I am not condoning it. You should not drive and break speed limit. But that's an example that was put on a text. Deputy Prime Minister.
I think it's very far. Of course, look, judges will have to decide this.
So they will have a degree of discretion, Mr. Raab.
Well, no, I just don't think that would amount to manslaughter in those circumstances. But the reality is that you're talking manslaughter is already a very serious offence. Let's remember that the individuals that were convicted and sentenced got 16 and 13 years each. But I think that there is an argument here, and I think it's a compelling and overriding one, that in those cases where that unlawful killing, that manslaughter, is against a police officer or another emergency worker whilst they're in the course of their duties, that there should be a greater protection for those emergency workers, and the sentence should be more severe. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about freak accidents and therefore people for mistaken or accidental deaths ending up receiving those kind of sentences. I think that's entirely far-fetched, if I may say so.
OK, I just put my listeners' observations to you. Can I bring you to other judicial matters? Colin Pitchfork, of course, has now been recalled back to jail. To remind my listeners, he was the double child rapist and murderer from Leicestershire, convicted in the 80s. What is the process now? How long is he going to stay behind bars? How would he next satisfy a parole board?
Well, there's a whole set of criteria in relation to whether he could ever be re-released. Obviously, the conduct for which he was recalled would be taken into account. And let me just say it would require very rigorous scrutiny, and certainly to the extent that I have any involvement, it would be very rigorous indeed. Equally, I don't want to say too much more.
Can I put it to you, you don't want to see him coming out from behind bars, do you, Justice Secretary?
Well, I don't want to. What I don't want to do, Nick, is say anything that might prejudice the decision that the parole board, or indeed any role that I have, because I don't want to attract legal attack or review of that.
Are you happy with the parole board?
Let me preserve that case. Let me avoid prejudicing it. What I would say about overall reform, because the two things tend to be meshed together, and I know the relatives of the victims have raised this, is we've got a root and branch reform. I think at the moment there's the way the system operates is that there's a presumption of release at the parole board stage unless there's demonstrable risk that is shown. I think more generally, I want to look at that. I think we do this in other contexts, environmental contexts. We have a precautionary principle. My precautionary principle in this context would be overridingly in favour of public protection. And so we're going to come up with proposals. I'm looking at this this actively, but I want to get that right. But that is broadly the way I'm looking at this.
OK. Other stories around at the moment, Deputy Prime Minister, there seems to be a growing revolt. There's even a suggestion in one paper that a dozen Conservatives have written letters demanding a leadership challenge, so it has been revealed. Are you aware of this? Do you know any of these MPs involved?
No, and it strikes me as there's the usual Westminster tittle-tattle. I'm not aware of that. There'll always be the scrutiny, the noisiness that comes to British politics. Frankly, overwhelmingly, and I talk to colleagues, MPs on the backbenches on all sides all the time. There is huge support for what we're doing and what the Prime Minister is doing. Jobs are up, growth is up, wages are up. We're doing criminal justice reform, from the recruitment of the extra 10,000 police officers on top of the 10,000 we've already recruited. The criminal justice reforms, I'm going to be bringing forward proposals in due course on reforming the Human Rights Act. We've heard about the £96 billion investment in the north for transport infrastructure.
Yeah.
This is what overwhelmingly MPs and, more importantly, our constituents want us focused on.
But it was only last week the Prime Minister admitted that he'd driven the car into the ditch over the Owen Paterson affair, and then I think we'd all accept he made a bit of a pig's ear of a speech on Monday. It's hardly surprising there's concern among Tory ranks, is it? Oh, and also, you're behind in the polls, Deputy Prime Minister.
I think it's, first of all, the fact that we're as strong in the opinion polls at this stage of the electoral cycle is testament to all the work we've been doing, and I think there's huge credit still for the boss and for the government on the vaccine rollout. But of course, what we're focused on is the boosters, which will see us through the cold months. I think the Prime Minister has been leading on that, obviously the Health Secretary as well. The criminal justice reforms, as I mentioned, not just human rights reform, victims reform, to make sure, not just in this case, as we're trying to do with Lizzie Harper, but more generally victims at the central, the driving seat of the criminal justice system. The levelling up agenda, £96 billion invested in infrastructure in the North and the Midlands. I think, to be honest with you, we're, as a government, focused on that, and I suspect your listeners, constituents, and our backbench MPs overwhelmingly are focused on that as well.
Were you to be asked to describe the Prime Minister's speech to the CBI on Monday in one word, what might it be? Shambolic? Hilarious? Embarrassing?
Ebullient.
What, for getting halfway through Peppa Pig and then losing his way? Ebullient, Mr. Raab.
Jobs up, wages up, economic growth, joint fastest in the G7.
Yeah, the game might be up if you can't remember the speech, but do go on. Yes, sorry, Peppa Pig. Here we go.
The serious point about Peppa Pig, and I'm a big fan with young kids of Peppa Pig, mine are a bit old for it now, but it's a fantastic British export right around the world. And I think the point, from the creative arts through to our entrepreneurs, how much Britain's got to offer. You'll recognise there's been a lot of sort of doing Britain down in the course of the Brexit debate and since. And he's making the point of the huge amount we've got to offer economically, exports, getting the world together at COP26 in Glasgow to make huge strides towards tackling climate change. This is what we're focused on, and this is what the Prime Minister is dedicated, and I'm confident is achieving.
Last couple of things. In the 2019 Conservative Manifesto, Deputy Prime Minister, and I quote this promise, a guarantee no one needing care has to sell their home to pay for it in the troublesome area of social care. Now I understand the government line is no one will be forced to sell a home they or their spouse is living in. That's not quite the same, is it?
Well, look,
it's been watered down again, many are saying.
No, I don't think so. Look, it's an £86,000 cap on costs. Anyone with assets under £20,000 won't pay anything for their care. It's very clear that no one living in their home, and no one's partner living in the home, will be forced to sell their home. The fact that we've got this £86,000 cap, and by the way, Labour are criticising it, but their manifesto was a £100,000 cap. So what we're doing is much more generous and also credible. There's no alternative plan we've seen. It will also allow, for example, for the first time ever, insurance products to make sure that everyone can in an affordable way, deal with their costs, the lightning strike of dementia that can hit like a bad lottery, families up and down the country, wherever they may live, and make sure that we can deal with those costs in a way which provide the care that they need, but also avoids them needing to sell their home. No one has come up with a serious, credible alternative, and I'm proud that we're a government that are dealing with an issue which for generations has been ducked.
OK, lastly, you mentioned you're a great fan of Peppa Pig. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, Deputy Prime Minister. One former Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, once told me he was a huge fan of, I think it was Kung Fu Panda because of his children. He didn't fare very well. But I'm sure, Deputy Prime Minister, if I were to ask you Peppa Pig's little brother's name.
Oh, God. One of them is called George.
That's it. That's it. And lastly, as Justice Secretary, the name of the police officer in
I can
Peppa Pig.
picture him now with his whistle. Isn't it a dog or something?
Oh,
I can't remember
close.
his name.
It's Police Officer Panda, Justice Secretary.
Oh.
And all the questions...
No cigar.
There we go, very close. All the questions I've asked you down the years, I never thought I'd ask you this one. Have you ever compared yourself to a Vindaloo in your style of politics and the sort of politician that you are? And one of your predecessors, Robert Buckland, was a Cormer, but there's more strength to you. Deputy Prime Minister.
No, never. But I am known, in fairness, as always with these media stories, there is a small element of truth. I am known for describing reforms on the curry list menu as either Korma, Madras or Vindaloo. And you'll be getting nothing but Vindaloo from the Ministry of Justice over the weeks and months ahead.
Justice Secretary, Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab, thank you for your time joining us here on LBC. 1 minute after 8, news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the government has backed a new law to ensure criminals who kill emergency workers receive life